Welcome to All About Art. My name is Alexandra, and I'm an art historian, curator, and writer. Within this podcast, topics relating to art history, cultural policy, the art sector, as well as a large range of other art-related topics will be covered. Conducting critical discussions, having entertaining exchanges, or just enjoying some relaxing chats, All About Art is where you'll find it all. Join me in exploring and developing cultural discourse. Welcome to another episode of All About Art. In this episode, I sat down with Rachel Fine, Executive Director of the Yale Schwarzman Center in the United States of America. Rachel is someone who came into arts leadership without a roadmap, as I think most of us actually end up doing. She trained as a pianist and she found her way into arts admin almost by accident. So in this episode, we talk about what the Yale Schwarzman Center actually is and what it does, both on a more local and an international scale, because I actually think that it allows us in the industry to think more widely about community and culture, especially as I was coming to this interview from a more fine art angle, and she was coming at it from a more musical angle, which was really interesting, seeing as my master's degree, for example, in arts administration and cultural policy had a music pathway. So during my degree, I actually had a lot of interaction with a lot of people that had a different background to mine, more in music, whereas I was in fine art. And it really broadened my horizons as to what the cultural and creative industries on a wider scale can look like. I asked Rachel about what her role as executive director entails, and she goes into depth on what it means to run an institution of this size. We spend a good deal of time talking about career paths and how Rachel fell into arts administration. We talk about why fundraising is more central to arts leadership than people may like to admit. We talk about what the financial reality of this field actually looks like, and if you can have a stable career in it. And of course, we also talk about where someone who wants to work in the cultural industries, either be it in music, in opera, in performing arts, in fine art, where they could potentially start. Thank you, Rachel, for coming on the podcast. Before we dive into the episode, I want to take a minute of your time to mention that All About Art is on Patreon. We are mostly volunteer-led, but in order to cover running costs and other expenses, we make it possible for our lovely listeners to support us, ranging from £1 a month to the price of an oat latte a month, or on the higher end, the price of a Sunday brunch per month, depending on the tier you want to choose. If every person who listens to the podcast signed up for the £1 tier on our Patreon, we would be able to sustain the podcast while also having scope to produce episodes more frequently and expand our activities in demystifying the professional arts sector. So, if you want to receive early access to episodes and behind-the-scenes content, maybe you want to get some merch, or if you just love what we do and want to support us, I would be thrilled if you considered signing up. The link to the Patreon is in the show notes. And now, on to the interview. Also, thank you to our sponsors at Synergy Associates, the Art World Tech Gurus, for supporting this episode's production at their clubhouse on Pall Mall. You can find more about Synergy and their facilities in the show notes. Welcome to the podcast, Rachel.
Thank you so much.
Can you start us off by giving listeners a sense of who you are and how you got here? Because I know that you grew up as a pianist, which is quite a solitary kind of musical training and activity compared to, say, someone who comes up through an orchestra or an ensemble. That's something that you and I talked about when you and I initially had our first conversation together. And I ask this because I think it's quite interesting to set the tone a bit when we're hearing from someone with your background. And I want to ask you how you ended up where you are today.
Absolutely. In terms of my professional trajectory, it really did start at the piano. So I don't want to say I fell into piano lessons. My mother was very attuned to the fact that I had a great ear. We owned a piano in our house. I was sounding things out without having had any lessons. And so she took it upon herself to get me lessons, and it just sort of blossomed from there. So I think early on, I exhibited a lot of talent. I was entering competitions from the time I was 6 years old and performing frequently. And so it really started at the piano. And I don't want to say it was a solitary life. It is solitary in the practice room, but it was also a rich life outside of my regular, grammar school and then ultimately middle and high school. And I ended up being in a piano studio with a lot of other wonderful pianists and a teacher who really tried to give us a comprehensive education, not just in playing the piano and being great performers, but in music theory and music history. And we did a lot of things together as a studio. But yes, practicing is solitary. And I spent many, many years in practice room. But I was on one path for a very long time. And I think as I got better and better, I continued to enter more competitions and then went to high-level summer programs. And so I felt as though the universe was telling me, this is your path. I went to Interlochen Arts Academy during the summer, which is a big summer music festival. It's now all performing arts and boarding school. I went to a program called Music Academy of the West before I went to college, and that was another sign, in my opinion, that they only took very few pianists in that program. I was only 18 at the time, and I was the youngest pianist there. So all of these things were pointing in one direction. And then as a freshman in college, I went to the Eastman School of Music. So didn't do much else beyond piano and chamber music and, all the things that go along with being a pianist, accompanying. I didn't teach at that time, but I did everything you could as a pianist, a young pianist. But then as a freshman at Eastman, I got injured, and that completely derailed my career. I developed what many musicians, high-level musicians who spend long hours in a practice room, it's just like any sport, honestly. It's a really, really rigorous activity. And I think as a child, too, you don't really think much about your posture and your alignment. And
no, as I've started to get near 30, I've started to think about that a lot more. When I was in my 20s, I could do whatever I wanted, sit however I wanted. Now, if I sit wrong or if I go to sleep in the wrong position, I wake up and I'm sore and achy, and it's a completely different thing. And I guess when you're doing something like an activity over and over and over and over again, it can be really hard on your body, on your joints, on everything.
Absolutely. And of course, as you become more and more advanced, the repertoire just gets harder and harder and harder. And you think about a composer like Rachmaninoff, so this happened sort of without my realizing, fully what was going on. But I ended up having a number of different sort of repetitive stress related issues. And at the time, it sort of became a secret. It wasn't something that you wanted to go out there and publicize. So I was very quietly trying to get treatment or physical therapy, but truly in an environment like that, whether it's Eastman or Juilliard or, a major orchestra, you didn't really want people to know you were injured. But, in that environment, I wasn't making much progress in terms of healing. So I ended up leaving. But that's my origin story, really, was as a pianist. And ultimately, when I got injured, I spent many years trying to go through rehabilitation and retraining. And I've had every conceivable treatment you can imagine, ultrasound treatment, all kinds of osteopathy treatment. So everything from traditional medicine to alternative treatments. But at a certain point, it was clear that I would need to do something else. So that's where it all started.
And that's where it started. And so can you tell me more about the Yale Schwarzman Center now? Mm-hmm. What is it? How does it position itself? Because I want to understand how, and this is why I was really excited to ask this question, because I want to understand how it has an impact on, number one, a more local scale, like on a uni level. Number two, a national scale, like within the context of the US and what sort of policies there might be to support it. And then number three, like internationally. And that relates to even why we're getting to sit here together in person today, relating to the recent opening of the Schwarzman Center in Oxford.
Mm-hmm. Well, I could talk about this forever, so I'll try to be as concise as possible. The Yale Schwarzman Center is not like any other cultural center I have run. And I've been doing this for more than 25 years now. It is at the center of campus, which is not insignificant. So it has become more or less the heartbeat of the university. It is an arts and culture center. It is a major hospitality center with all kinds of dining platforms. It is a wellness center. But more than all of those things, and what I like to say in situations like this, it is a community center. Yale, like Oxford, has a residential college system for undergraduate students. So when you're an undergrad, you live in a different residential college. There's Berkeley and there's Silliman, and a lot of your social life revolves around that residential college. And I don't know exactly how it works at Oxford, but Yale has never had a student center. And so in 2022, November 5th, 2022, the Schwarzman Center opened, and it's really the first place to provide a robust and energetic student center, and as I said, arts and culture center, wellness center, hospitality center. And it just, that community connection and that continuity, in my opinion, just hasn't existed there in this way before. And I should add, this is very important, that it's not just for undergraduate students. And that is an extremely important part of its mission, is that it serves everybody. So it serves undergraduates, graduates, faculty, staff, and the greater New Haven community. So everybody is welcome in the building. And I think in terms of providing a bridge to the New Haven community, it's essential.
And how did you just told us your origin story and how you sort of developed and got, I guess, how you entered into the creative industries through music. And now you're executive director of the Yale Schwarzman Center. Within that, I know that when you and I first started chatting, we were talking about how you didn't sort of, I guess, saying you fell into arts admin. But I think that that's really interesting because I studied arts admin and cultural policy. And you sort of had gotten, I guess, quote unquote, grown up, or I guess gone through your initial stages within the creative industries as a creative, as a creator.
As a performer, yes.
And then you are now on the more admin side of things. So when did that start to switch? How did that sort of develop?
Well, first of all, I should say I really could have benefited from your book because I really mean that, because I did not know what else was out there. And so for me, it ended up being process of elimination. And once I knew that I was not going to have a career as a piano soloist, I started doing many other things. So I was able to, I did a lot of piano accompanying and vocal coaching. And that's when I ended up in Vienna, and I was working with this incredible, he was actually an American pianist named Norman Schettler, who was at the Musikhochschule, and that those people were actually having a career in arts administration or arts leadership. I did not know. And here I was in my mid-20s, and I didn't know any of these things. And I would say programs in arts administration had just started popping up. So there might have been one, I think Columbia University might have the oldest, but I didn't know about them. There was nothing called, arts administration when I was an undergraduate. So.
Yeah. I think one of the most transferable lessons from that, and this is if someone's a performer in music, or if someone is in the fine art sector as a painter or, performance artist or anything like that, or a writer, all of these things are, okay, so you have this craft and you believe in it and everything, but there might be other things that end up coming your way, like curveballs that get thrown at you, and you have to learn how to adapt to that. And I feel like sometimes in the cultural and creative industries, we don't necessarily have the tools in order to figure out what you could do other than being an artist or a musician, being in, the fine arts sector's case, being a curator, a gallerist, or working in a museum.
Right.
I thought those were the only three options.
Right.
And when I didn't get three of those, well, I did actually, I started working in galleries, but when I felt like, oh, there could be more out there for me and I want to find out, I ended up cracking open this whole new world basically of oh, wow, there is so much that I could do. And in writing my book, I even got to figure out, okay, so maybe this in the future could be really interesting. I really loved the art fair chapter. I don't think I would do well in auction houses. All of these different things. And so I think that what is really a great takeaway from you is that, if there are artists listening in or people listening in who think that they have this one path and they have their heart set on it, yes, that's great. There might be other things that are actually in the long run going to be where you need to be and what your life should look like, right?
But so many artists now have to task themselves with knowing those things. I mean, it's a very different career now than it was even 25 years ago. And I just think about some of the artists I know who are so good at social media and promoting themselves and generating opportunities for themselves that might have been generated by an manager in the past, or who knows what the most traditional paths were. But I think every artist could benefit from having more breadth and understanding.
The ecosystem.
Oh, absolutely.
Understanding the ecosystem.
Absolutely.
That's what I keep saying.
Yeah.
if you're an artist, if you're an art historian, if you're a musician, if you want to go into arts admin, or even I say, like, if you're an art collector, for example, an art lover, understanding the ecosystem and the work that people are doing is so important and so beneficial to do. And so that's why, hopefully everyone buys my book, but
everyone should buy your book. But one of the things you said the other night, which I also thought was so important, is just about knowing yourself, knowing your personality, knowing if you're an extrovert or an introvert. I did not fully realize I am so extroverted.
Yeah, I could tell right away.
Oh, no, I am. And like you, I love people. I love building relationships. And I was reading, a little bit in your book about fundraising, which is where I started.
Yeah.
And that it's just so important. And I think the truth is, I probably would have been a happier cellist being in a youth orchestra, early on than a solitary pianist. And I think as a pianist too, you have to get to a certain level of expertise before you can start playing substantive chamber music with other people. So it's a long time before, I was probably 12 or 13 before I was ever meaningfully collaborating with other musicians. So it's just so important to know. And I think once I started volunteering and figuring out that behind the scenes, there's a lot of teamwork, and that I could, in fundraising, constantly be meeting with people.
Like your job is literally to meet with people. And if you're an extrovert, that's perfect.
Well, an extrovert and someone who is genuinely curious, very curious about people.
Yeah.
So, and again, I didn't even know that there was fundraising. And of course, it's so important in American cultural organizations. We rely heavily on contributed income.
Yeah, to be fair, in the UK as well,
you're
a lot
moving
more.
in that direction.
Yeah, I speak from the Austrian standpoint because I have that information, but I think more mainland Europe, they still get a lot of arts funding from the government. But yeah, the UK is also slowly very much going in that direction of relying heavily on philanthropy and fundraising and things like that. Definitely.
Yes. So, but that's where I ended up. So after doing the volunteer work, I just started to apply for entry-level positions in art. What I learned was arts administration. And I ended up my first job was development associate for a wonderful choral organization. They actually operate on an international level called Chanticleer. I'm sure they've spent a lot of time in London because it's a big choral town. But it's a men's choral organization that is first rate. So that's where I started.
Right.
Yeah.
I feel like development and fundraising is a really good kind of segue into more arts like leadership positions, I must say, because I hear that a lot, also echoed in the book, echoed in previous podcast episodes I've done, and hearing it again from you, sort of underlines that I think perhaps if you are interested in going in that direction, one day being executive director of a community center, of an art center, that learning how to fundraise is key.
Well, and I think for artists too, again, many of the artists I work with often now have to fund their own projects or be some sort of collaborator in finding funds. And I think recording.
I've had to do that with the podcast. I have to pitch and find my own funding because I'm not getting any funding.
Yeah. So becoming a grant writer, knowing how to do all of those things, really, really important. And you're typically not introduced to that early on in your, musical evolution or development.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but my arts admin and cultural policy degree had two pathways. One of them was more fine art and the other one was a music pathway. But I was put together, like all of my classmates were also, one of them went to Juilliard, one of them, they were musicians as well, or people wanting to go into that direction. And we learned about grant writing. We learned about where to research for grants. Exactly. And, this is exactly what didn't exist 25 years ago, like you said. But now, there are those opportunities, which I think is really, really good. But I want to ask you, because, you mentioned 2022 with the Yale Schwarzman Center. You started your role just before the center actually opened, which I think is quite a fascinating moment to step into a leadership role. How do you put an organization on the map for the first time, especially when, the building and the architecture, all of that sort of predates the opening? You're basically coming into what I assume was an already sort of existing strategy, an existing business model, perhaps even programming already in place. What was that like? Well,
I was not the first executive director, but I am the first executive director to operate the center. So yes, I started October 24th and the center opened November 5th of 2022. I did this to a certain degree in my last job, when I was in Los Angeles, I ran a cultural center called the Wallace Annenberg Center for the Performing Arts, which is right in the center of LA in Beverly Hills. And it also had opened maybe a year before I started. So I seem to be gravitating to these new projects that don't, I wouldn't call it a blank canvas because, as you said, I think the gift that Mr. Schwarzman made was in about 2015. It was a significant gift, transformative for the university, either the largest or one of the largest in its 320-year history. And then I think they broke ground in 2017, and then they were supposed to open in 21. But of course, the pandemic delayed the opening. So I came in and I said at the beginning, it's not like any cultural center I've ever run because of the hospitality piece, because of the wellness piece, because of the student center piece. And so initially, I really had to figure out what the building was and what the building could offer. It is a huge historic building, and it's absolutely beautiful. And the whole thing, 125,000 square feet, have been repurposed to support all of these things, multiple dining platforms. And the wellness center is called the Good Life Center. And then there are a multitude of venues that can house live performance. So I really needed to understand what the building could offer, what the architecture could offer. And that is so important in the Schwarzman Center. And so much of our artistic intent ultimately has grown out of the architecture itself. And I also say that because none of the spaces are traditional. So when you walk into a traditional theater, you might have a proscenium stage and 500 seats or 1,000 seats.
Yeah.
That's not this. Every space is a multi-use space. There's no fixed seating. So all of the seating is flexible and can, be designed in any number of ways. And there's no fixed seating capacity. There are capacity limitations just depending on the size of the space. So we might have one space on the 4th floor that can only hold up to 100 or 120 people. But we, as the administrators and in conjunction with the artists or our production team, can figure out what seating iteration is going to best support the work of the artist. So we had to take all of those things into consideration. We also had a very small team when I started, and I think we needed to figure out, okay, what do we need our staff capacity to be to support the level of activity in this building? So there was just so much to figure out. And yeah, there was some limited programming that was going on, but not a full, 3 to 5 year artistic plan, which is, we're getting closer to that as we learn how to do what we're doing. So I had to do a lot of things, but I would say most significantly, we needed a business plan for operations that had strategy and goal, and most importantly, an artistic intent. And that was a group effort with the people who were on the staff at that time, with our consultant, Michael Kaiser, who has had the most illustrious career in arts administration. He ran the Kennedy Center, he ran Covent Garden. So we couldn't have a better consultant or facilitator helping us put that initial plan in place.
Wow.
But then we also had partners across the university and community that weighed in on the plan. And I think, having those strategies and goals and the artistic intent, that would allow us then to be aligned. And what I can tell you is that when you come in and there's no plan, no one is really aligned. And that is absolutely essential, that we're all marching in the same direction, that we all have the same understanding. And also that it's not me or just Michael Kaiser saying, this is what you're going to do. They were all invited to
You have intrinsic
partake.
motivation. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It was a collaborative plan where we collectively decided what was going to go on the plan and what we wanted to be. Now, we're 3.5 years in. We need to revisit this plan periodically because, first of all, the environment in those 3.5 years in the United States and the world has changed drastically. So it's very important moments that we go back and say to one another, is this still relevant? Is this still the plan that we need to be focused on given what's happening around us and how that is affecting university life? Because it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, no one is immune from what's happening in the world right now.
No.
But that was an essential exercise, not just to provide direction for us, but for us to all get to know one another, for me to get to know the university, for us to get to know the building better. But we're still figuring it out. We are still really, really young. And I would say, I'm just throwing a statistic out there, but, 80% of what we do, we're still doing for the first time.
Yeah.
So we have, certain templates for things that help us put on certain programs and performances. We have a couple of series that we've done multiple times, but there are other things. We just did the biggest opera production of our 3.5 years, and that was a learning experience. It took us 3 years to get there and to offer this to our audiences and our community. It was a massive undertaking, and we learned so much in the process, but we had not done anything on that scale prior to. It was about 4 weeks ago.
Yeah. And what does within your role now, just in case anyone is really, really interested in what you do on the day-to-day and what it means to be executive director of a community center focused on art and culture, what does your day-to-day look like?
Sure. My job actually resembles in many ways the executive director positions I've held in the past. So this is my 4th executive director position. I've worked at organizations, arts organizations of different sizes. So my first executive director job was at an organization with a $1.5 million budget. So that's considered still mid-size. Anything over $1 million in the United States is considered mid-size, but small mid-size. And, I wouldn't say like tremendously under-resourced, but definitely like we were running this organization through the Great Recession. So having to make many, many sacrifices during that time. And when you're executive director in that job, you just do everything. And yes, we probably had a staff of 8 or 10. So my job still looks in some ways like my jobs in my other executive director positions. And that is some combination of strategic planning, marketing, fundraising, finance. It depends on the organization, but you might be tasked with labor relations if you're working with a union. I ran a union orchestra in Los Angeles. So those are sort of the primary areas of focus. And I would say I'm more of the generalist. And then I have, for example, a leadership team where I have a director of marketing PR. I have a director of fundraising. I have a finance director. I have an HR. So I'm much more of the generalist. But I truly think about all of those things every single day. But I'm also the person who has to see the big picture. I'm the person who has to make the really tough decisions. I'm the person who has to think 3 to 5 years out and bring the team along. We also have an advisory board. So in my previous positions, I always worked with a governing board, and that was a huge part of my job, is to be very engaged with that board and to make sure they were educated on what we were doing, making sure they were our best advocates, our best fundraisers, our best spokespeople for the organization. And so board building, I actually am someone who loves board building. Not everyone in my job does, but I do. And we're building a new advisory board for the Schwarzman Center. But there's only one governing board at Yale, and that's, of course, the board of trustees for the university.
Right.
And a lot of the cultural organizations have advisory boards. So I do all of those things.
Yeah, that's so much, but also it feels like it's really incredibly rich and interesting and never a dull moment, but probably a lot of really hard moments too. And it sounds to me like, you needed a lot of, I'm just kind of referring back to the interview that I did with Sally Talent in my book, who's now stepping into being the director of the Hayward Gallery here in London. Okay. But when I interviewed her, it was about her position as the director of the Queen's Museum in New York, which she just left or is in the process of leaving. And so she was telling me, like, you can't just like if you want to be in a leadership position, you can't just like think that you can step into it. You need to learn how to run a small team, and then how to run a mid-sized team, and then how to have a budget of, small and then small, mid-sized. And you have to really work up to being able to lead an organization like this, or else like you won't know how to do half of the things that you just named.
Right.
But yeah.
I think I would also, if this is something that interests you, you need to ask yourself, are you a leader?
Yeah.
And that sort of goes back to personality and extrovert, introvert. I have been a leader since I was 3 years old. I think my parents would tell you that. I always had to be the director. And I remember, staging plays with the kids in my neighborhood, and inevitably I was the director. I was leading that process. And I think there is something in my DNA where I like to be in charge. And that feels very, very comfortable to me.
I get it.
And that's not true for everyone. There are many people, and there is nothing wrong with being second in command or being the general manager. I mean, those people are absolutely essential. But I think you need to learn that about yourself. Do you want to be on the front lines, or do you want to be behind the scenes?
Yeah. I'm definitely more of someone who takes charge, and I don't think
Next Gen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's literally something that when I speak to the team at I have one person that kind of works with me on Next Gen, and she always says that I should just say that she's the back end of Next Gen, like she's behind the scenes. And for me, I'm like, no, come, and she's like, no, that's not me.
Yeah.
That's not what I want.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, right. We're not the same. And I need to remember that not
Right.
everyone wants the same things that I want. Like
Right.
I naturally kind of step into the decision making and into the yes, no, I want it this way. And this is what I think is good. And I have a voice and I make my voice heard, hopefully never in a pushy way and never in a way that doesn't show that I'm also humble and motivated and grateful for everything that I do and have as well. But I think, as you said, reiterating what you said, like my parents would also say like, okay, yeah, she runs the show and she does it happily. And that's just always been me. And that's, I guess, where the entrepreneurial spirit comes from with, the things that I do with like getting a book deal, doing the pod, all of that came from my own motivation, from my own volition. And I also will say because there is kind of a difference between a board in the US and a board in the UK, because in the US, from what I understand, there are like boards that are really like governing boards and you report to them.
The CEO does, yes.
Yeah.
And the executive director, yes.
Versus is an advisory board a bit different because they advise. And I think here in the UK, maybe there is that distinction, but like being a board of trustees means that you advise and you help, but you don't have fiscal responsibility for the organization. And I just applied to be a trustee actually somewhere. So let's see if that actually pans out, but I'm keeping an eye out for those things.
But you're right, in the US, if you are on a board of directors, nonprofit board of directors, you are in charge of hiring and firing the CEO, although that usually falls to the board chair. You are fiscally responsible for the organization collectively. You're responsible for good governance. There are very clear responsibilities of being a nonprofit board leader in the United States. Our advisory board, because Yale has a governing board, I would say advocacy is huge, definitely philanthropy. We have several board members also who might guide us artistically. That's not always the case everywhere. A lot of artistic leaders don't necessarily, want a board to cross the line, but we have such creative, wonderful board members, and we've done several things with many of them artistically. So yeah, but we're just about 3 to 5 years in on building this board. And it's a little bit different too, because a lot of people don't live locally. And sure, there are organizations, especially big global organizations, like I'm sure the Museum of Modern Art has a national or international board. Ours lives in many different places. The bulk live in New York, but only 1 or 2 live near Yale University. So that makes it very different too. They can't just swing by and see a show.
Yeah. I kind of want to pivot a little bit and ask you about something that, again, you and I spoke about when we had our initial conversation, because thinking about career paths and thinking about your career path and how you sort of, quote unquote, fell into arts leadership. It wasn't something that you necessarily set out to do. But it's something that you've really found your path in. But I do know that you had to sort of piece it together largely on your own and find your way, volunteer, think outside the box. And people, one of the biggest things that I hear in the creative industries is that people really struggle to make a living. And I know that you and I kind of griped about that a little bit on our call. But maybe could we talk a bit more about that, about the connection perhaps with being more informed about what career possibilities there are and how it connects to actually being able to afford your life when you're embarking on a career in the creative industries? Because I know that's something you're passionate about.
Yes. Well, again, I wish someone had mentored me in college and told me about even internships in our field, because at least in Los Angeles, there is the most wonderful program through the county, and they offer more than 100 internships in the arts paid in the summer. And they end up being, 12 to 14 weeks. But name the organization, whether it's the LA Philharmonic or LA Opera or, a more grassroots arts organization, they get funding from the county to have internships. And that's the kind of thing. I mean, I would have just thrived if someone said, oh, by the way, while you're in college, if you live in LA or you go to school in LA, you're eligible for one of these. I think it's more than 110 now. The good news is that when I worked there, I always hosted interns through the county, always. And I have a few success stories too of people doing just great things because they discovered these internships in college. So that's one thing, is there are many, many different opportunities for young people in college, maybe even in high school, I don't know. But the other thing I learned much later is that there's a lot of summer work at festivals, at arts festivals. So think about something like the Edinburgh Festival, okay? I am sure they expand their team, their staff. There are probably paid positions and volunteer positions to work at the Edinburgh Festival when it's in high season. Well, this is certainly true in the United States, and it's not anything I knew until I was your age, until I was 30. But I found out much later, the Aspen Music Festival offers incredible work opportunities, paid work opportunities in the summer where you can build your resume and network. And I mean, those were such huge launching pads for me in my career. So I spent one summer working for the Santa Fe Opera, and I was there for 3 months. And then I spent one summer working for the Aspen Music Festival, and that was 3 months. And having that on my resume, having that experience, having that network of people, it was just absolutely invaluable. And so I'm trying to just spread the word, especially among Yale students, just telling them there are so many wonderful summer opportunities. And it's not even an internship. These are paid gigs if you already have experience. And in both cases, they gave me housing for the summer. And I just remember at Santa Fe Opera, they gave me a rental car. I'm like, you've got to be kidding.
That's amazing. That's actually really lush.
I got incredible housing, wonderful job. I mean, they're intense. We were working, a minimum of 6 days a week, and often,
12-hour days
there.
or whatever.
Sure, because you're there through the performance at night. But for me, it was exhilarating. And of course, I was really young at the time. And so I didn't think twice about it. But yeah, there's a vibe. There's an intensity at those festivals. So that's one thing. I would just look into those types of internships and summer work opportunities if you have the flexibility to do that. And now go back to your question, because I can't even remember the question. I got off on a tangent.
No, I mean, it was exactly like this sort of thing. Like, what are talking about how people can be more informed about the career possibilities and also, try to afford a life working in the creative industries.
Yes. So another incredible resource, and again, I sort of had to find my way into these organizations through my various jobs, but there are so many wonderful, I would call them membership and advocacy organizations in our field. So if you want to be an orchestra administrator in the United States, then you belong to the League of American Orchestras. And I'm sure they have a lot of European members too, because it's a really, really strong organization. And virtually every orchestra in the United States, whether it's the New York Philharmonic or a teeny tiny local regional orchestra, they belong to the League of American Orchestras. And they offer all kinds of wonderful benefits and training and conferences. So there's Opera America, there's Chorus America, there's Dance USA. Right now, because we're a presenting and producing organization, we belong to what's called the Association of Performing Arts Professionals, and that's based in New York. And they have this truly exhilarating conference every year in New York, and you just learn so much from going to those conferences. So that's another just really, really great resource.
Yeah. I mean, the sort of art history or fine art equivalent is, for example, the Association for Art History here in London, and they do really amazing work. Yes. I had the CEO, Gregory Perry, and another person who is at the association, Christina Bradstreet, on my podcast in the past. This was like a year or two ago. And they just do such amazing work. And they recently had their art history festival, I think in Cambridge, and it happened last week. So like Stephanie Diekvos, who was, the moderator for my book launch talk, she had come down from Cambridge because she did a talk in the morning, and then she came down to moderate in conversation with me for the launch. But she was doing that as a part of the art history festival. And those sort of things are so important. And there's also I'm aware that there's the Association for Art Lawyers. There is something, I can't remember the full name for it now, but I think the acronym is something like ACHU or something like that. And it's for writers to make sure that you can sign up and you get, your copyright protected just things like that really support any sort of level of discipline. I'm sure there's more for performing arts as well as for fine artists like painters, drawing associations, anything like that, sculptors. And I feel like that is so important to sort of look into those sort of communities. And I guess that's what I'm trying to do with Next Gen, is to create a community for arts professionals.
Right. Wonderful.
Exactly for that sort of I guess the Association for Arts Professionals, which I think there are other things like that, like the young professionals in the arts, and that exists as well. There are so many amazing communities that you can find. And I think that is one of the keys, because sometimes when you're looking for internships or opportunities, you don't even find them through traditional means, especially in the art sector. You find them through talking to people, through networking. And it's oh, well, we're kind of looking for someone and you'd be perfect. That's how I got some of my jobs and some of my internships. And so when you put yourself in the room with people that's also where you're going to find these opportunities and grow. And then you can also, I always advocate for like talking very openly about pay, because I speak to my friends a lot about what our rates are, like how much we charge for like a panel talk, for example. And it's like, oh, do you charge $150, $250, $350? And it's like, well, okay, yeah, I charge around $250. Okay, that's kind of the standard. Oh, these people charge around $500 so that none of them get lowballed and they're all, and it's like, oh, okay. So we should all work together to think about raising our panel talk, whatever, you know what I mean?
Right.
And, I guess anyone listening in will also understand like, okay, between $250 and $500 is kind of a very normal rate to charge. I think that is a really important thing. And it kind of ties into my penultimate question to you, which is about mentoring, like about, of course, finding your community, which is what we were just talking about, and having like associations and organizations that you're a part of that really sort of underline and support the goal that you're trying to reach in your career, but also mentoring and finding mentors or being a mentor once you're at that point is so key. And so, as I said, as my penultimate question to you, what do people most consistently not know or not understand when it comes to like working in the creative sector?
Sure. Well, this goes back to your other question, which is you can absolutely have a life of stability in the arts. And you said this at your panel discussion. Sure, it's not easy at certain points, and entry-level positions may not pay all that well, but I can assure you that the CEO of the New York Philharmonic is making plenty of money. It might be near $1 million a year. And yes, it probably takes a while to be a leader of a cultural organization of that magnitude, but there's a lot of in between. So,
and like stability doesn't need to look like $1 million a year. It can.
No, it doesn't. I'm just saying,
100%.
That's one extreme.
And so that middle ground that you're talking about, that's so vast.
Yes.
And that is also offering all of these stable jobs, right?
Yes. I mean, so many. And I think, when you have your first job, whether it's a fundraising associate or when I worked at Santa Fe Opera, I was a rehearsal administrator, which was a very, very stressful, busy job. But I also learned, there's a job in wigs and makeup. There's a job in, costume design. I mean, I just had no idea, and it blew my mind. And everybody was getting paid to do those things. And yes, I mean, you at Santa Fe Opera or the Metropolitan Opera, you have to be the best of the best. But there's a lot of in between. There's a lot of middle ground. And I think there is a way to build a very stable, healthy career. And now, I'm at a massive institution. I have never worked at an organization this large. And there is something so consoling about it because I'm used to working for much scrappier, somewhat, less resourced organizations. And I can sleep at night in a way that I never could before. I know I'm going to make payroll. And that is I think people have to decide that for themselves too. Like, can you work in an environment where you don't necessarily know when the next big grant is coming in? And I did that for 25 years. There was a lot of that. And especially through the Great Recession and the pandemic, there was so much uncertainty. But I am pretty comfortable being in that environment. And like you, just being incredibly curious, resourceful, economical, efficient, and optimistic, and figuring a way out of those situations and finding that next dollar. But you should also know that might not be for you. And I can tell you a university, at least this university environment, feels very, again, we're all going through a hard time, with everything that's going on in the world. And I don't want to diminish that. But Yale's also been around for 320 years. And so there's a certain amount of stability that I feel day in and day out. And I also just feel so well taken care of as an employee in a way that I never have. It's stable.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that is one of the biggest lessons. And that's something that I hate that we constantly in the creative sector have to continuously justify. Yeah. But alas, it's good to repeat it and it's good to say it and it's good to hear it.
Yes.
Rachel, I have a final question to end the episode that I ask all of my guests. And it's just a fun one. If you could pick one artist from art history to have dinner with, who would it be and why?
Well, I thought about this a lot, actually. And if I have to settle on one human being artist, it would probably be Johann Sebastian Bach, who I love with all my heart, so much that I had Bach's crest tattooed on my wrist.
I'm kind of disappointed that you didn't say Mozart, maybe Austrian and all that.
I love Mozart too. I do. I love Mozart. I love Brahms. I love Schumann. I mean, there's so many composers I love, and I also.
But you love Bach.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because the job that I have now is really focused on contemporary music and living composers, which I feel so strongly about. But I have such an attachment to Bach, and I don't know actually what it would be like to sit down and have dinner with Bach, but I did live in Leipzig, Germany for 3 months. And I was so close to what's called the Thomas Kirche, where he did so much of his work. Because I have 2 kids, and I know, being a professional working woman with family it's a lot of work. It's a lot of juggling. It's a lot of being incredibly well organized and efficient, and like all the things we were talking about. Bach had 20 children.
He did?
Yes, he did.
Like actually 20?
Yes. I think it's 20 children. And he was so productive. If you look at his oeuvre of cantatas, I mean, that's how he was learning. That's how he was making his living. He had to be producing those cantatas for the church. He's so prolific. And so it's mostly I'm just so curious. I'm just so curious about Bach. And I never, ever tire of his music. It is ingenious. So I'm mostly curious about him, and having been in the city where he lived for many, many, many years, and of course, all these children. But I also sort of marvel because, of course, he has all of these incredible works, like the St. Matthew Passion on such a grand scale. But then he also wrote all of these beautiful miniatures, like minuets, which were teaching tools. So I think Anna Magdalena was his second wife. And there's a Anna Magdalena notebook, which was essentially, I think, to help her learn how to play the keyboard instrument of the time. So anyway, I love Bach. I never tired of Bach. The Italian Concerto, the Goldberg Variations, it's just the most inspirational heavenly music out there. So maybe Bach.
Maybe Bach. Well, Rachel, thank you so much. That concludes my questions.
Well,
thank you for coming on All About Art.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And I really wish you the best with your book, which is essential reading.
Thank you. And that is it for today on All About Art. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a rating or a review, as it helps more people discover the show. Also, feel free to share with your friends, or if you share on social media, tag me and get in touch. Thank you so much for listening.